Hi, and welcome to AP Daily. My name is Greg Hill, and I teach at Dr. John D. Horn High School in Mesquite, Texas. Today, we're talking about topic 3.1 Introduction to Culture. Now, culture is one of those things, it's one of my favorite things to talk about. I'm sure it's probably your teacher's favorite thing to talk about as well. This video will examine how culture comprises the shared practices, technologies, attitudes, and behaviors transmitted by a society. What will we learn? First, what comes to mind when you hear the word culture? For many people, it means the ballet, or is it the opera? But those are traits of a particular culture, not culture as a whole. Culture to me is the sum of the human experience by a group of people living together. It's all the things that makes up our daily lives. These are shared practices, whether it be weddings, birthrights, technologies, including waveforms of communication, attitudes in the form of who should be in charge, behaviors, what's good and what's bad. Culture is divided into material and non material culture. Material culture is those things that people give value to, such as cars, jewelry, or maybe athletic wear that your favorite pro athlete wears. For example, look at the hysteria when the latest Air Jordans come out. People come from miles around just to find one or two pairs of that sneaker. Non material culture is things people take care of. These are the ideas of a society, which are often considered dear to a group. Folk culture, these are local and homogeneous, usually staying within the region. Pop culture spreads across large swaths of a region, is often a heterogeneous group of people that consume this type of culture, and it is also widely diffused at the same time. Let's look at an example. First of all, shared practices. These things are things such as birth rituals. What happens when a baby is born? Is there a christening? Or is there a celebration of some sort? Also, death rituals, burial practices, in the sense of is there a burial? When does that burial take place? Or even is the body itself buried at all? Weddings, how are weddings celebrated? Education, who gets educated? Where they're educated? At what times in their lives are they educated? Technologies. Communication amongst group is distinct and clear to the members of a group. It takes the form of language and gestures. This includes any devices used to transmit communications as well. How do people move from place to place? Whether it be by boat, car, on foot, or by train, even amongst the most developed countries, there is a distinct variance in transportation. For example, in the southern United States, movement by train is still in its relative infancy. But if you go to such cities as New York or further into London, Tokyo, or Seoul, South Korea, they have very pronounced transportation networks. How do cultures automate their lived experience? I'm talking about in terms of experiences in a culture that resonate deep within the participants and bring a sense of nostalgia, like visiting a place that specializes in Norabong, aka karaoke in Seoul, or samba in Sao Paulo. Attitudes and behaviors. When does a person become of age? Is it 16, 17, 18, or is it younger? This is when children move into adulthood and take on adult roles in the culture. In terms of gender roles, what are the supposed roles that males and females take, if at all? What is expected of each gender in the greater society? Is it matriarchal, where females have most of the leading roles, or is it patriarchal, where males have the leading roles? Also, systems of government. Who's in charge? These are the determinants that influence the governments that dominate a particular culture. Let's practice. When you look at this photo, what do you see? Also, what are some of the cultural elements you can pull from this currency? If you need to pause it for a minute, do so at this time. Currency often exemplifies a culture. Here we have Moroccan dirhams. Oftentimes, heads of states, rulers, or important historical figures will grace the currency of a country. What should we take away? Culture is a sum or an adding up of all the components of living within a group of people. It is shared practices, technologies, attitudes, and behaviors. I'd like to give a shout out to the governors of Johnson Senior High School in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hi, and welcome to AP Daily. My name is Greg Hill, and I teach at Dr. John D. Horn High School in Mesquite, Texas. Today, we continue to talk about topic 3.1, Introduction to Culture. This video will discuss how cultural traits include such things as food preferences, architecture, and land use. What will we learn? Cultural traits are those elements developed through social interaction and are transmitted or communicated in some form. They are learned in the sense of through some type of association, they are transmitted. As a baby, you probably heard the first elements of your native language from one of your parents. As you got older, you learned more about your culture through even greater interactions. Cultures can change. They can change from year to year or over longer periods of time due to such things as changes in taste or interactions with other cultures. Cultures can vary within themselves due to regional variations or for spatial reasons. I'm often reminded of my good friends in Massachusetts and how they chop their R's for many words like chowder or that kid is wicked smart. In the Caribbean, the salsa dance, not the food item, varies from Puerto Rico to Cuba. Cultures give meaning to different elements in the form of words, buildings, or even elements of nature. Cultures do change over time. Some major elements can be influenced by where you are in the world. How much outside association with other groups occurs. This also includes the written form. In terms of clothing and fashion, it is heavily influenced by things like what is considered appealing to a group in terms of aesthetics, what's pretty, what's not, what's hip, and what's not. What climate zones does a group live in? That often affects your day-to-day wardrobe. The practicality of adapting clothing to a particular climate takes precedence over fashion. Religion can play a hand in defining dress that outwardly displays piety or religiosity. Lastly, art, whether in the visual or performing genres, acts as a cultural expression. Statues, jewelry, music, dance, or drama are exemplary in many ways of a group of people. Food preferences can be influenced by a group's agricultural ability, including what types of climate and soils are in the region. Religious restrictions also influence food choices. For example, have you ever tried halal or kosher foods? They must be prepared in a specific fashion. Architecture is another element we see evidence of a culture. This is influenced by what a group thinks looks good, and again, in terms of aesthetics. Religion with certain structures have inserting functions like the towers of many mosques, where worshipers are called to pray. Building materials derived from locally sourced materials, coupled with the topography or changes in the elevation, can become a signature for a culture. Lastly, land use is also a great influence on architecture. Sacred spaces such as the Vatican or the Grand Mosque in Saudi Arabia have significant value to those who hold those sacred spaces dear. Let's look at an example. But first, I have a question. How do you cook your rice? Do you boil it? Do you use instant rice or that minute rice? What do you like to pair it with? Think about that for a minute. A lot of times that is your cooking preferences are influenced by your cultural preferences as well. What type of rice do you like? Is it basmati or brown rice or fried rice? And then my favorite, what style of pizza do you like to eat? Is it pepperoni? Is it cheese? Is it sausage? What influenced that? Often these are influenced by your culture. Here's an example of my time in Ecuador in the Andes region of South America. We were being served the lunch of fava beans, two kinds of potatoes to which the Andes is an agricultural hearth, broccoli, avocado, and cuy. Cuy is a huge delicacy in the Andean region, particularly in Ecuador and Peru. It is so popular you can find roadside stands that serve it grilled or roasted. Take a wild guess at what you think cuy is. You guessed it, guinea pig. Sorry to my guinea pig lovers out there, but again, this is an example of local culture in the Andean region of food preferences based on readily available food sources. What can you gather from these two photos about the local culture? Here we have the Hassan II Mosque in Casablanca, Morocco. King Hassan II is the former king and also the father of the current king, Mohammed VI. Notice how large and pronounced the mosque is in the cultural landscape. What does this tell us? In Moroccan society, the king not only is the head of state, but is also known as the commander of the faithful and acts as a spiritual leader as well. Let's practice. I'll give you a minute to look at this question. A world map of hog production per capita would reveal the lowest values in which of the following regions? Survey says D is the answer choice. What accounts for this? In many countries of the Middle East, the physical characteristics of the area, coupled with religious preferences, make it inhospitable for pork production. What should we take away? Cultural traits serve as the building blocks of a particular culture. I'd like to give a special shout out to the Seahawks of Sun Lake High School in Land O'Lakes, Florida, AP Daily. My name is Greg Hill. Today we finish off topic 3.1, Introduction to Culture. In this video, we'll discuss how cultural relativism and ethnocentrism are different attitudes towards cultural difference. Now, don't be surprised if I butcher those words, so I'm giving you a fair warning. What will we learn? First, how do you identify yourself? Think about that for a minute. What is the first thing that you say you are? People gain a sense of who they are through culture. It could be through ethnicity and all of the variants that go through that. Gender, which is an evolving term for many societies and not so for others. People are coming into their own definitions of gender more and more in the 21st century. Religion is also an identifier for many people, even down to the sublevels. For example, I am a Christian, but I could also identify as a Methodist or a Baptist. Nationality or country of origin. For some people, this is the first thing they identify with, well before any others on this list. A person of African descent from, say, the Dominican Republic will often identify as Dominican rather than Black. Cultural relativism. I told you I might butcher this word, so hang on, get ready. Cultural relativism seeks to be empathetic with other cultures and their cultural traits. It seeks to understand these cultures. You see these cultures with open and receptive eyes. This often includes looking at ideas of morality, of what's wrong and what's right. Should this be worn or this object eaten? Ethnocentrism, on the other hand, involves looking at a culture from a sense of superiority. You look at it through the lens of your own culture. We are better than the others, or we're morally superior. A key word here is xenophobia, or a fear of the other, which often generates a lot of ethnocentrism, as does ignorance. This can and has escalated into violence against other cultural groups. Let's look at an example. Here we have members of the First Nations of Canada. Canada has a unique perspective in that it embraces what it calls the cultural mosaic, where cultural groups maintain their distinctiveness while participating in the whole of society. I also like to look at this as a tossed salad, in the sense that various cultural groups maintain their distinctness while also being part of a whole. So in terms of the salad analogy, you have tomatoes, cucumbers, and lettuce, but the tie that binds them together is salad dressing. Would you eat a taco made of a grasshopper? Now, if your first inclination was, ooh, that's disgusting, I would never eat that, or tacos are made to be eaten with ground beef only, you're exemplifying an example of ethnocentrism. Now, just to outright and out and say, oh, I just don't want to eat bugs, That's just a sign of your taste of this. Now, but to have a disdain for that group, any group of people that chooses to eat grasshopper tacos, that's a definite sign of ethnocentrism. Here we have women in religious dress. Now, for a lot of people, to see women with their head covered is a sign of submission. To understand that and accept that these women are just simply practicing their faith and make them feel welcome in society is a sign of cultural relativism. Let's practice. A group of tourists is offered a platter of currywurst and fries. They see that the fries are covered in ketchup and mayonnaise. They proclaim, "We don't eat fries with mayonnaise in our country." What is that? Is it cultural relativism or ethnocentrism? I would say it leans towards ethnocentrism. Now, when I was in Germany and I tried currywurst with fries covered in mayonnaise, it was a different taste, but it's an acquired taste. I wouldn't say it was the worst, but it was pretty good. What should we take away? People's views of other cultures are based on their worldview. I'd like to give a shout out to the Pirates at Poteet High School in Mesquite, Texas, and teacher Angela Hutchinson. My name is Greg.